Welcome to Teaching Canada's History, the podcast where we explore how educators are bringing the past into classrooms across the country. I'm your host, Renee Allen. In this special series, we're speaking with the finalists for the 2026 Governor General's History Award for Excellence in Teaching, a national award that celebrates innovative and impactful approaches to teaching Canadian history. These conversations highlight how teachers and students are working together to interpret the past, connect it to the present, and share stories that matter. In this episode, I'm joined by Swapna and Colleen, two educators who are supporting the unique needs of their students with culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. We discuss how to cultivate meaningful learning opportunities by centering students' needs with the support of their communities. Here's my conversation with these important educators.
Good afternoon. My name is Colleen Toulouse. I'm from Sagmuk, Anishinaabeg, up in Northern Ontario. I work for our local school, Bidabin Kinomal. I am Ojibwe or Anishinaabe, and basically I'm an educator and I've been working in my community for so many years.
Hello, my name is Swapna Bhagat Luthra, and I teach Enhanced Education Support Classroom, also known as EES, at Mackenzie Town School with the Calgary Board of Education here in Calgary, Alberta. In my classroom, I work with students who communicate, learn, and experience the world in a very different ways across a wide range of sensory, cognitive, behavioral, and communication needs. And I've been teaching for over 18 years across international settings and in Canada. And one idea that has stayed with me throughout is that learning is never one size fits all. And that perspective has led me to the guiding question for my project: who gets to be a historian?
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Swapna. So I know that you both have quite a bit of experience in terms of the education field. So I want to kind of take it back to the beginning of your journey in the field. What was it that kind of made you become an educator in the first place?
Hmm. Well, I think I became interested in education probably when I was really young. Um, I recall at one point I would play school outside, and we did actually live in an old schoolhouse when we moved back to our community from Toronto. So inside there, it was a classroom. It was a small school, so basically, we lived where the teacher would have lived, and we had like a big blackboard, and it was more or less our play space. And I think from there, I'd be writing on the blackboards, and I enjoy just talking to everybody, like my friends and cousins that would come over, and we'd play school. So I think from there, I was like, "Oh, I think I might get into education." And that's when I started thinking about teaching. I became a journalist first, and I find that with the teaching and education has led me to where I am right now. Like the inquiry, researching, it all just seemed to come together where I'm like, okay, I think this is where I should be, and this is what I want to do for my community. And I think my passion for just history and learning about our culture and just trying to make the future bright for our community and just to contribute gets me excited. And I think I like I said, I am where I am supposed to be. And when you come down to teaching, it's very unique from our point of view of Indigenous learning. It's lifelong. And I honestly don't think I would have got my project completed from where I am, because I came at it from being a grandmother, the point of view from a perspective of being a grandmother when I looked at my project. And in my own, I guess, cultural pathway, I'm trying to become a very respected elder. That's where I am going to be, or I'm heading. So I do ceremonies. I sit with other grandmothers, and I'm thinking I am going to be the best grandmother for my community. So I think that's where I started looking at my roles and responsibilities. And basically, it came down to how we taught children. And I think looking back at traditional tools and our traditional education, I was thinking, how can we bring these two together in a classroom setting? And how can we actually bring back some of our culture, our way of being into the classroom? And my project basically took that and I ran with it, from helping to understand the spirit of a child. And we know we all have spirits. So basically, my whole project is teaching to the spirit of a child, which is something you can't really measure, but you can still give them guidance, you can still give them values, and you can still give them cultural nurturing. And I think that's what my project was. So if so where I'm heading to, like I came became a teacher, but then at the same time, my future, it's to become a teacher of a traditional elder. So hopefully that's my path.
Mhm.
As I get up there in age and I became a grandmother, it just opened my eyes to saying, what are my responsibilities as a grandmother? So basically that's
Mhm.
the root of the project that I did.
Thank you for that, Colleen. I like how you talked about those kind of initial days playing school and writing on the chalkboard. I feel like that's a sentiment that a lot of people can relate to, even if they're kind of on the playground or with siblings. Those kind of early years where you're nurturing those skills is so crucial, and the ways that you've kind of been able to use different skill sets and evolve over time, and how this season of your life has been so instrumental to your teaching practice and the way you support your community. I think that's really valuable. What about you, Swapna?
Education has always been close to me because of my mom, because she herself is a teacher. But I chose it because I wanted to create the
Mhm.
kind of learning experiences where students feel seen and capable in their own way. And in my classroom, that perspective matters every day. One of the things I love most about my job is that no 2 days are ever the same. My students constantly challenge me to think differently, to be more creative, and celebrate the many different ways people learn. And I would say they have made me a better teacher because I teach special education classroom, so it looks a little different from the traditional one. So alongside literacy, numeracy, science, social studies, and life skills, we spend a lot of time building communication, independence, self regulation, and social emotional skills through individualized supports and hands on learning. And I feel that's what makes this work so meaningful. Every day, my students remind me that learning cannot be defined by a single format or expectation. Much of what matters in my classroom happens quietly in moments of connection, communication, and small steps forward. And as a teacher, I am often reminded of the idea that not all growth is seen, but all growth matters. And that is what continues to shape how I teach, and I love what I do.
That's really wonderful. I think that's something that's been very evident in both of your projects in terms of how much this work means to you and
Mhm.
how impactful it is for the students and the community members that you help support. So, I want to kind of take a moment to talk about the settings that you both work in. If someone were to step into your school or your classroom environment, can you kind of paint a picture of what that might look like?
Okay, I guess if you were to come to my school, you would actually drive into my community, Sagma It's very It's a beautiful place. We have over 200 students in our school from K to grade 8. It's a new school, actually. We just opened it up in September. So, in our school, we really tried to make it ours. So, we do have a cultural room where teachers can go in and smudge. Our students are all from our community. We tried to make it very inviting. We started putting up art. We have a carved eagle as you walk in, which was made by one of our elders in the community, as our team mascot is Migaze, which is eagle in Ojibwe. So you would walk around. We are really pushing language in our school, the Ojibwe language. So you would see things that really represent the Anishinaabe identity. So we do have a very, very nice, welcoming setting. And I think if you walked into one of our classrooms, you would see we do have elders that come into our classrooms that sit with the children. We also have like cultural workers that come around. We have mental health workers. So we also have teachers that I guess you could say they recently graduated from an Aboriginal or Indigenous teaching program. So we find that is something that we really need. And so we're very fortunate. We had 6 graduate this year as full licensed teachers. So there's things that are really moving. And I think that's why I really, really wanted this project to become a reality for me. The last classroom event or activity that I did was on the faceless doll. And if you're not really familiar, faceless dolls was used by the National Aboriginal Women's Association to represent murdered and missing Indigenous women. So I give kind of a historical background to the doll itself. And then we do an activity on making a doll a mural. So those are the types of things that we have to really, I guess, come at it with students in a very sensitive way. And that's why I said, our cultural tools actually present that. And with that, I'm also saying, with my doll, she's so significant because all of the social problems that we are seeing today, she can address them. So basically, when I'm looking at that, we have children with different backgrounds that come to our schools. So we have different, uh, I guess, different color skin. And then we do see bullying. We do see people that don't have a sense of belonging. So basically, the doll, she is teaching to the spirit of the child. And regardless of what background you have, and as a responsibility for being a grandmother, my job is to teach you guys about our culture and to make you belong. So that's why I said this doll is very significant because no matter what, my job as a grandmother is to teach you. So basically, way I look at it, no politics involved. That's basically, I'm teaching you the beauty of our culture, the beauty of belonging and inclusiveness. So that's where I'm coming at. And if you're in our community, this is where your family is, your roots. So yeah, so I do have dolls that I collected from different nations, and it's very incredible because some of them went through colonization. So you can look at the actual doll. And through the doll, you can see the process of colonization. We didn't have faceless dolls. I mean, there were faceless dolls, but eventually there's faces now. But that's because they were selling their arts and crafts. But then I guess the tourists didn't like it that it didn't have a face. So eventually those dolls evolved into having a face, but the original dolls did not. Um, but I will let Swapna speak, but then I can come back, answer another question, because I could sit here and talk all day about it.
No, we will definitely let Swapna share a little bit about her classroom slash school context, and then we can get a little bit more into your specific projects.
Thank you for the opportunity. So, an EES class within the Calgary Board of Education context here is a specialized, highly supported learning environment for students who have significant and complex learning needs. So, if someone walks into my classroom, they are not just seeing students, they are seeing a full team in motion. There's one teacher and two educational assistants. And we also have a multidisciplinary team working together in real time to support very different needs. So, what might look busy at first is actually highly coordinated. And ES Classroom doesn't look like a traditional setup with students doing the same thing at the same time. It is a flexible, highly structured environment where students are engaged, but in a very different ways based on their needs. So you'll see visual supports and sensory spaces, movement options, and a lot of individualized learning happening at once. So, what holds it together isn't the sameness. I would say it's the routine, the predictability, and a shared goal of meaningful participation for every student.
Thank you, Swapna. So I know you just mentioned a little bit about working with neurodiverse students.
Mhm.
If you want to share a little bit about your project and why it was so meaningful and important for you to tailor it in such a way that best supported your students.
Yes, absolutely. One of the biggest misconception that I encounter is the belief that students with complex learning needs can't engage in deep historical thinking. And I actually believe the opposite. Every student has the ability to think critically when we provide the right supports. So, in my classroom, I focus less on finding one way to teach and more on creating multiple ways for students to access learning. So, some students learn best through visual supports such as photographs, maps, and timelines, while others benefit from tactile materials and sensory experiences or handling historical artifacts that help them connect with the topic. And technology, adapted text, videos, and other hands on resources all become important tools. My neurodiverse students' communication also looks very different for every student. So, some students use spoken language while others communicate using augmentative and alternative communication, also known as AAC device, which is speech generating devices and communication systems that help them express their ideas along with gestures, eye gaze, sentence stems, or pod communication books that use pictures and symbols to support conversation. So rather than seeing those differences as limitations, I see them as different ways of expressing historical thinking.
Mhm.
And a student might demonstrate their understanding by selecting images regarding a message or participating in discussion in their own way. And I use history as a way to ensure every student feels that they belong in the conversation about Canada's past. That led me to this project. And this project began with one question that completely changed my thinking as a teacher: who gets to be a historian? As a special education teacher, when I work with students who communicate, learn, and experience the world in very different ways, too often I realize that traditional history instruction limits who can fully participate.
Mhm.
So instead of simplifying history, I wanted to redesign access to it so every student could engage in historical thinking. And that intention became the foundation of my project. Who Gets to Be a Historian? Reimagining Canadian History through Indigenous Perspectives and Neurodiverse Inquiry. I know it's a long title, but at its core, the project is about belonging.
Mhm.
I invited students to explore Canadian history through Indigenous ways of knowing and multiple pathways for learning using oral storytelling, indigenous artwork, music, land based learning, visual supports, tactile experiences, and augmentative and alternative communication. So our classroom became a place where history could be heard, seen, touched, discussed, created, and communicated. So it was really special. And in the end, the project answered the question we started with: who gets to be a historian? Well, every student does
Mm,
when we design learning that gives them genuine access to history.
mm,
This project changed the definition for who gets to participate in history.
mm.
It proved that when we remove barriers without lowering expectations, neurodiverse students don't just learn history, they help shape our understanding of it.
Swapna, I really appreciate what you said about what it means to reimagine how we teach history and whose experiences and whose voices we kind of position at the forefront. And I know identity was a really integral part of your project, as well as yours, Colleen. Do you want to share a little bit about the role of identity in creating your own project?
The role of identity, well, basically, when I look at history, a lot of it comes to the fact that Indigenous people still exist in this country, and we are not just confined to the museum. Although there are artifacts, and it is very exciting to actually look back at history. And for me, identity was kind of looking at something that we know would still help us today. So that's where I was thinking, what did our ancestors do that really built a spirit and identity of our people, right? So when I was looking at the project, our community actually said, like, if we were to look at educational outcomes, what are things you would like to see? And one of them was connection to land and self identity. So I looked at those two and I was like, well, what? I know there's many ways, but what way can I come up with? So that's when I came up with my project. And as I was going through learning about the history of the doll itself, it revealed a lot. So here I thought I was being very creative and innovative, and I was breaking through. But there's already been other women, Indigenous women, that have been doing this, making dolls to teach. And one of them was Mildred Cleghorn. She's Apache. And basically, she went around and she made dolls representing the different clothing, traditional clothing. And she taught, I guess, Europeans or newcomers, and this is how she used it with dolls. So I was thinking, oh my God, okay. So it's not an original thought, but I mean, it's coming from my community in which I had to dig deep on what type of doll we had. And I think when we start connecting to land, actually making the doll, it's in a lesson in itself from gathering the materials that she's made of. Really explains a lot about our environment that we live in. So you can compare her to other dolls and what natural resources did they make to make their dolls. And you kind of question the why. Why do they have this type of doll and why don't we? It's because of our environment. We have moose here. We sewed with moose hide. We have cattails. So that was one of the original stuffings for the doll was cattails. And then there is ways you have to connect to the land of, uh, give and take. And I learned when to do it. So basically, you have to go out in the cold and pick the cattails because there's no mold and there's no bugs. So I was out there in minus 30 degrees picking cattails for my dolls, and I was like, okay, this is why if I do it during spring, it's going to be moldy, and if I try to dry it, so there was a natural process for the doll to make it. So that was the connection to land, and I think identity. It really, like I said, it all came back to being a grandmother. So grandmothers traditionally gave the dolls to their granddaughters or to the young girls, and it was really to help them with sewing techniques and to kind of the dolls represent the miniature life of each culture, and they would replicate building, little mats from cattails and all of that just to help a child learn her responsibilities. So I really found that it was it was really looking at the history of the doll, and now I'm seeing writers emerging, and the traditional doll makers still exist today, and searching them out, finding them, talking to them. It's been really exciting, and I don't know. Like I said, I could probably talk for hours on the doll, but yeah, I really enjoy talking about it, and it makes me really proud. Like I'm thinking, look, here's part of our culture. It's not just in history book. We're bringing it back. We're bringing her back, and she can really help us guide and continue forward. So I'm projects like that get me excited when I see things happening, and it's kind of like bringing history back to life. She was probably there, but now I'm at the point where I'm saying, let's get her into the education system. Let's get her into the hands of our students, and whatever gifts she has, she's going to pass it on to us.
I can definitely hear the passion in both of your voices as you're talking about your experience of creating these projects and supporting your students. So, I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on a moment throughout your projects where you had something that was particularly memorable with a student. Maybe it was the way that they were engaging with the material, maybe it was the way that they kind of generated a new way of thinking or a new way of approaching the project. Are there any kind of takeaways like that that stand out to you?
Um, so I can give an example of one time we were doing the no face doll in the school.
Mhm.
Um, so I use yarn for the hair, and I actually went out and ordered a variety of different color hair. And one person came up to me and said, Colleen, you're going to need more black hair. I was like, why? She says, well, for the dolls. I said, what do you mean? I said, look at all our students, look at everybody. We all have different hair colors now, whether it's dyed, whether it's short, whether it's braided. I said, this doll, I want these students to see how they can represent their identity and how they feel on making the doll. So I said, I'm not limiting them, right? As long as they get the concept that the doll represents, at the time, all the MMIW. That's what I want them to get out of it. And I don't want them to be, just straight black hair with braids. But I said, look at all the beauty of this children. And we did have girls with different color hairs. And I said, if you feel that represents you, this doll represents you, and that vice versa. So I was generally pleased. Like the kids did, like they grabbed different color yarn, and it wasn't just one representation of how we look. So that's where I was like, okay, you know what? They get it. The kids are understanding it. So that's why I was like, okay, if they understand, it doesn't matter your exterior, it's inside. And that's where I'm really trying to teach them is the spirit. So yeah, that was a very I loved it.
I can definitely see why a moment like that would stand out in your mind. What about you, Swapna?
So I'll talk about one classroom moment that I'll never forget. One of my students who doesn't communicate using spoken language Instead, they communicate using their AAC device. That's augmentative and alternative communication.
Mhm.
So one classroom moment that has stayed with me came during when we were doing this project and during a virtual learning experience with the Art Gallery of Ontario and the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, where we were exploring Indigenous family portraits and thinking about how art holds stories of identity, relationships, and belonging. And through the artwork
Mhm.
of Daphne Ojek and Annie Futterbook, students were exploring how art and music communicate history, identity, and belonging. And during this lesson, a student who does not use spoken language began engaging with their AAC system.
Mm.
And with time, prompting, and structured support, they began building a message, selecting symbols carefully step by step. And that was just so amazing to see that what
Mm.
emerged wasn't just responses to the artwork, but a personal narrative about their family. So they identified people who mattered to them and connected those relationships to what we were seeing in the portraits. So what struck me was not the communication method
Mm.
itself, but the thinking behind it. And they understood that portraits were more than images. They carry stories, identity, and memory. And that same idea was now being applied to their own. So that
Mhm.
moment really shifted something important for me. If I had measured understanding through speech or writing alone, I would have missed it entirely. Because once access was there, that thinking became visible.
Mhm.
It reminded me that historical understanding doesn't belong to a method of expression, it lives in connection, meaning making, and relationships. And in a classroom like
Mhm.
mine, my role is not to simplify that thinking, it is to make sure every student has a way to show it. So that moment was really special for me when I saw that student making connection. It was just mind blowing.
Mhm. Oh, definitely. I can definitely see why that moment would be so transformational for you. And I think in the context of both of your projects, that's definitely something that's similar in terms of operating beyond kind of traditional ideas of what we have about teaching or what it means to teach history. And kind of as a final question, as we're kind of reflecting on your projects, if you had to give teachers or educators one tip or a few tips about what it means to create lessons outside of those kind of traditional parameters, whether you're working with culturally relevant pedagogy, whether you're working with differentiated instruction with students with various needs, what are some tips that you might give?
So, first of all, I would say this project has reminded me that some of the barriers we see aren't in our students, they are in the way
Mm,
we have designed learning. So,
mm,
my students changed the way I think about assessment, communication, and inclusion. They showed me that historical thinking isn't dependent on any reading level or spoken language. It is dependent on curiosity, evidence, perspective, and opportunity to think. So, if there's one thing I would want other teachers to take away, it's this: don't lower expectations, redesign access.
mm,
Students with diverse learning needs don't need less meaningful learning. They need different ways to engage with meaningful learning.
mhm,
So, when we remove barriers instead of simplifying the thinking, students really surprise us. They ask profound questions, understand multiple perspectives, and make thoughtful connections between the past and the present. And I also hope teachers remember that inclusion isn't just about having students in the same classroom.
mm.
It's about ensuring every student has a genuine opportunity to contribute. When students feel that their ideas matter, they don't just learn history, they begin to see themselves as historians and active citizens whose voices belong in Canada's ongoing story.
That was really beautifully said, Swapna. Thank you. Colleen?
Yeah, so I will start basically. I am sitting on the land that is full of history. And a lot of it wasn't written down, but passed down through storytelling and through our elders. So I'm very fortunate to sit here and to say, if you are going to do a lesson on Indigenous peoples, reach out to elders in your area, in urban settings, or in your community. And I think that's where the richness of history from their perspective comes in. And you may learn things that aren't written down in textbooks. And I think that's where it comes now for us to really understand our history, the stories we understand, and the stories that were told about us. So I know that uh, when we talk about being in my community, it is really place based understanding. And we are very fortunate we can walk to the fort, the history fur trade fort that existed in 1600s. So there's a structure there, but the history about it is there. And I think that's where we have a responsibility to teach our children the history of their community. And I think we did. We recently got artifacts from that were uh, from the Fort Lacloche. So basically, we have those now, and they're housed at Ojibwe Cultural Foundation. So that we brought the kids there, and one said it's so cool that it's right behind my backyard. So it is like, okay, good, this is what I want the children to say. You know what, I know about my community. So, and then when we have when you're basically teaching history, you have to understand that like the past, present, and future, they're all connected for our understanding of history. So whatever we're bringing forward, we look backwards. I'm looking at where I am today, but in my intentions of things, it's for the future. So history is very, I guess, encompassing for the past, present, and future. And I think that's generally an understanding. Like, I don't want to speak for all Indigenous people, but from my point of view, I was taught that at a very young age. And I think that's one of the history lessons where I would like to really emphasize with our students. What happened yesterday, we can take and learn. We are here, enjoy the present moment, but think about the seven generations that's coming behind you. We want them to have this place healthy, and we want them to have an understanding of who they are. So I'm really hoping that um, the contributions I bring today aren't going to be fast fix, but basically it's going to contribute to the strength of my community. And again, the whole project, it's Nishnabek based, so it's Ojibwe, because we know there's a lot of nations, but since I'm Ojibwe, that's really what I focused on. So any other Ojibwe communities can pick that up and relate to the doll, and basically um, use that as a guide for things that are local to them. So yeah.
I deeply appreciate both of you taking the time to share your reflections on your projects, as well as just offer so openly your ideas around teaching and how it is that your work and your own experiences
are so instrumental to the ways that you support your students. It is so evident in how you both speak so passionately about your work, how important your students are to you, and how important this work is for both of you. So thank you so much for your time.
Yes, to be good.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.